Well, you'd have to be blind Freddy not to notice that not everybody is doing well when it comes to a strained economy in Australia, and that's having its effect on business, and of course political change is having its effect on public servants right around the country. To talk about redundancy, let's talk with Gavin Martin, who's the Managing Director and Financial Advisor at Cornerstone Wealth. Gavin, welcome back to 2020.
Oh, g'day Neil, great to be with you. And it is challenging times for a lot of people who are potentially facing a redundancy.
Well, when you look at states like Queensland, where there are a lot of public servants who are being made redundant, and all sorts of figures bandied around about how far that may go. And then you've got criticism coming from the other side of politics saying that what's happening in the Queensland situation may well soon be reflected federally. There is something here that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable when it comes to your own employment security. But let's talk about redundancy today, because redundancy is something that many of us may be faced with in the coming times. Yes,
in Queensland and some other states, it's the government that is cutting back the workforce. I know in Victoria a number of the banks have been letting staff go, and some other organisations, private organisations, have been doing that as well. So it's not that uncommon that people we know and close to us receiving redundancies, and it's important to ensure that we cover off both the emotional side of receiving a redundancy and dealing with the financial side of it as well.
Let's talk about the emotional side in just a moment. Just to clarify, when we're talking about redundancy, it's not just a simple case of getting the sack here where you just terminate your employment. Redundancy takes into consideration an employment history, doesn't it?
Yeah, so a redundancy is where your position, it no longer exists. It's not being replaced by somebody else, but the actual position no longer exists. And there are specific rules around what's defined as a genuine redundancy and a redundancy payment, and then what's an employment termination payment. So if you're in the situation of receiving a redundancy, generally you're given a statement that says this is the information, this is the finances that you're going to receive, this is the tax that it's associated with it, and it really lays things out for you. In most cases, that's how it would work.
You touched on some of the downsides to what happens with redundancy and mentioned the idea that there's actually a grieving process that people go through. It's almost like losing a loved one.
Yes, it is. Some people really take redundancies as a boost to change careers or do something else. They're getting a lump sum. This financial year, you get $8,806 as a tax-free payment, plus $4,404 for each year of service, and you get that money tax-free. So some people treat it as a real boost to their financial situation. They might pay off some debt, and it might enable them to launch into a new career, or to just pay down some debt and move into another job. For others, it's a real challenge, and it's psychologically they're losing their job, and it's a really difficult time. And it's important to acknowledge that in that scenario, it's almost like losing a loved one. The grieving process and the cycle that you go through with losing your job is very much similar to going through the grieving process when you lose a loved one.
And I guess when you are faced with redundancy and it's not favourable, because as you say, some people actually look forward to it because it's a financial lump sum, helps them to relaunch in perhaps a new direction. But for others, it means being faced with the idea of reskilling if you want to continue your career and move into other aspects of the workforce.
Yeah, exactly, and that's where it becomes challenging. So I encourage people to, seek advice, to talk about it with their loved ones. I think we've seen movies or stories where people have continued to, catch the train each morning and, gone and sat in the park as if they were still working and didn't tell their family about it. So it's important to really, share about it if you're having trouble with it. Generally, outplacement organisations are really good at supporting people through this process, and what they do also is they identify your skills and your strengths and your interests and help guide you into that next position to find the work that you really love, or to start a business or contract your services. But yeah, that's something that you can do yourself or in conjunction with a outplacement organisation.
And Gavin, whether you are welcoming the idea of a lump sum payment because of redundancy, or whether it strikes you and you go through the grief of losing your career, the question of what you do with the funds is going to be facing both sets of people. What is the best way to deal with those funds when it comes to, whether you've got mortgage payments to continue to pay, or super, contemplating retirement down the track? What's the best way to go?
Yeah, the first thing is to understand exactly how much you're getting, and that 1-pager or 2-pager that I mentioned earlier is really important. So you understand how much you're going to receive, how much tax you'll need to pay, and then you can understand what you need to do with, or what you could potentially do with the funds. Often you can use it to pay a chunk off your mortgage, and that frees up that can actually save you some interest over the life of your mortgage. But you need to be careful that if you do pay it off your mortgage, that you have sufficient funds if it takes a little while to get back into employment again, because there are requirements around, for example, getting Centrelink payments. If you've received a redundancy, you won't be able to get Centrelink payments for a set period of time. So you need to make sure that you keep sufficient funds to live on. You might pay down some debt with it. But if you want to maintain flexibility, a good way of paying down the mortgage or saving some interest is to put it into an offset account. And that means that you can save the interest whilst it's in the offset account, but then utilise the funds, pull the funds out again if you need it in the future. If you don't have debt, then you can potentially think about investing the funds, and then you make the decision as to whether you invest the funds in your own name, through a trust, or potentially through superannuation, and that's probably the next decision after that.
For some people, they're going to see that redundancy coming from a distance. Others are going to be taken by surprise, and there'll be somewhat of a shock. I suspect, though, once the reality hits, getting back up on your feet and getting a new positive direction, a new perspective on where you can go next is an important thing. Otherwise, those funds can certainly run out. Yes,
exactly. Start that process as early as possible. And if I look at the people that I've been involved with, the receipt of or receiving a redundancy has been a really positive in their life. It has actually enabled them to grow, and whilst in the instance or at the time of the redundancy it was quite stressful, generally when looking back, people see a redundancy as a positive outcome in their life to actually get ahead financially, possibly change a career, to reskill, grow and develop. So I would encourage people to think about a redundancy in a positive light and not in a negative one.
So a little bit of research is necessary, and certainly when it comes to this particular issue, where everyone's circumstances may be different, the information that we've been talking about doesn't take into account personal objectives, financial situation and the needs of any person, and you should consider the appropriateness of the information having regard to your own objectives, financial situation and needs, and obtain some professional financial advice prior to making any decisions. Gavin Martin, the Managing Director and Financial Advisor at Cornerstone Wealth. There's a link to Gavin's site on the 2020 page at vision.org.au. Gavin, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for being with us today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil. Great to be with you.